There was an island, situated in front of the straits, which are by you called now the Pillars of Hercules. The island was larger than Libya and Asia put together. And Poseidon, receiving for his lot the island of Atlantis, settled his children on it. Their descendants were the inhabitants and ruled on many islands in the open sea. Atlas' lineage was numerous and honorable. In these passages from the Timaeus and Critias, Plato mentions for the first time Atlantis, an ancient, splendid, and advanced city that once was a rich, seafaring power, which, however, would suddenly disappear, swallowed by the waters, forever. The legendary island of Atlantis has long captivated historians and archaeologists. Countless experts throughout history have debated whether Atlantis was a real place or just a myth. There are many theories about the historical existence of Atlantis, its location, and which civilization may have inspired Plato's narration of this myth. There is a place in the Mediterranean that bears an incredible resemblance to Atlantis. We are talking about the ruins of an ancient city on the island of Santorini, Akrotiri, which, just like Atlantis, was swept away forever by a catastrophic event, an event that changed the course of history forever. We are Fabio and Giulio, and we believe that the most fascinating place to explore is the past. We've always been passionate about history and archaeology, so we have decided to explore it with you. In this series, we want to investigate the most incredible events, eras, and mysteries of history, and tell you why some have changed its course, and others have remained forever in the collective imagination. In this episode, we discuss the Minoan Eruption, an event that contributed to the collapse of one of the most advanced civilizations of the past, and had a profound impact on our culture, inspiring myths and legends. To learn more, we decided to travel to the site of the eruption and explore with you the remains of this fascinating chapter in Mediterranean history, in a journey throughout history, archaeology, and myth. We are now in Santorini, one of the most beautiful and visited islands in the Aegean Sea, characterized by white houses built overhanging the sea, by bright blue domes, by delicious food, and by sunsets worthy of the 1001 Nights. But perhaps what interests us the most is this view, these cliffs, which, as you can see, extend throughout the island. These cliffs are extremely steep and drop into the sea for tens and tens of meters. They tell us of a fascinating story, but more importantly, of a devastating past. Santorini is a crescent-shaped island, and together with the islands of Thirassia and Aspronisi, they form a near-perfect circle. This is not a random shape. At their center rise two small islets, Nea Kameni and Palea Kameni in Greek, old and new burnt islands, made of volcanic rock and dotted with thermal springs. This complex is also called Caldera of Santorini and extends over 10 kilometers in diameter. Caldera is a geological term that refers to a depression in the ground caused by the eruption of a volcano that collapsed on itself. It differs from a crater, which instead is characterized by an accumulation of lava in the shape of a cone due to volcanic explosion. The caldera typically has a circular shape, just like the ring of islands behind me. And in fact, even if partially submerged, we are right on one of the most famous calderas in the world, formed 3,600 years ago, following the so-called Minoan Eruption. This area is in fact the most active part of the southern Aegean volcanic arc, where the African plate meets the Eurasian plate, and one moves over the other at a rate of 5 centimeters per year. These movements have always generated strong earthquakes and intense volcanic activity. And in fact, right here, in the place of this archipelago, once stood a single volcano island, Thera. Geological studies show that Thera erupted numerous times over hundreds of thousands of years. leading to repeated collapses of the caldera, and subsequently, with the release of new magma, the reconstruction of a volcanic cone each time. In the 17th century BCE, the volcano erupted again, but this time there were two differences. First, the violence of this eruption was unprecedented for this volcano. Experts have classified it as a level 7 eruption on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, a super-colossal or ultra-plenian eruption that released more than 100 cubic kilometers of material and collapsed the entire volcanic structure. The island of Thera sank on itself.
Second, mankind was already present on the face of the earth, and indeed civilization had already arrived on this island. In fact, this made the Santorini explosion the most catastrophic event in human history. And the devastation it caused inspired myths and legends that survived to this day, such as the myth of Atlantis, which we'll talk about later. But the repercussions of this explosion, of this eruption, were not limited only to the myth. In fact, the impact that this event had was felt throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. In particular, the collapse of the civilization that populated this island. But who were the inhabitants of Thera?
Akrotiri, the only settlement on the island of Santorini from before the Minoan Eruption, was in all likelihood one of the outposts founded in the Aegean by one of Europe's most advanced Bronze Age civilizations, the Minoans. To talk about the Minoans, however, we must take a trip to another island of the Aegean, Crete. We are now at Knossos, 5 kilometers from the current capital of Crete, Heraklion, where once stood an urban complex that was in all likelihood the main political, religious and economic center of the Minoan civilization. This palace not only exemplifies perfectly the power, the splendor of the civilization, but also gave rise to one of the most famous myths of ancient Greece. In fact, it is said that this palace was the residence of the legendary king of Crete, Minos, and that its more than 1,000 rooms gave rise to the myth of the labyrinth and the Minotaur. So, this is where we want to begin our exploration of the Minoans. In the beginning of the 3rd millennium BCE, the island of Crete was probably not much different from how we see it today, a fertile island with a mild climate, rich in vegetation, and blessed by a sea that allowed abundant fishing. In short, Crete was a perfect place for the rapid development of an advanced society that from a technological, artistic, and social standpoint preceded by centuries all the cultures that would later develop in Europe. However, the island lacked two raw materials needed in the Bronze Age, copper and tin, which therefore had to be imported.
This is the reason why, already in the 2nd millennium BC, the Minoan civilization was able to develop a flourishing maritime trade to build ships and fleets that put them in contact with other great civilizations of the past and also made them the undisputed masters of the Mediterranean Sea. In fact, here at Knossos, as in other sites in the Aegean Sea today, you can find frescoes depicting maritime and trade scenes.
According to classical Greek tradition, and historians of the time such as Thucydides and Herodotus, who lived more than 1,000 years after the peak of the Minoan civilization, Minos, the legendary king of Crete, established a formidable fleet and extended his dominion over the entire Aegean Sea by founding colonies and establishing a thalassocracy, or government of the sea. And the first person known to us by tradition as having established a navy is Minos. He made himself master of what is now called the Aegean Sea, and ruled over the Cyclades, into most of which he sent the first colonies, expelling the Carians and appointing his own sons governors. And thus, did his best to put down piracy in those waters, a necessary step to secure the revenues for his own use. The influence of the Minoans in the region was indeed undisputed, and it is possible that at one point Crete even received tributes from the Mycenaeans, the culture that was developing in mainland Greece at the time. To clarify, the civilization that, according to Homer, fought united in the Trojan War. So, instead of comparing the Minoans to other European civilizations, such as the Greeks, who did not reach their same level of sophistication until centuries later, we should compare them to the other great Bronze Age civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia. These civilizations, in fact, were in constant contact. Indeed, we can find frescoes in Akrotiri and in Crete depicting distant lands. Moreover, archaeologists found Cretan art in the Nile region and in the valley between the Tigris and Euphrates. While the Minoans were probably not completely conflict-free, they were far less warlike than their Mycenaean neighbors. Comparing what remains of these two civilizations, the surviving art of the Mycenaeans often depicts scenes of war, while the Minoans favored nature and everyday life in their frescoes. The Mycenaeans were a warrior society led by a warrior aristocracy. Think of the mythical Menelaus and Agamemnon. The Minoans, on the other hand, were a more peaceful society, perhaps led by a priest-king. Finally, while the Mycenaeans built their settlements on hills or surrounded them with cyclopean walls for defense, the Minoan settlements, such as Knossos, did not seem to be fortified.
Clearly, being here at Knossos, we must mention the main characteristic of the Minoan civilization, also called the palatial civilization, the palace.
The palace, exemplified in its most magnificent form by the Palace of Knossos, the main Minoan center on Crete, was a building aimed at centralizing the entire political administrative structure of society. The Palace of Knossos was the very center of all aspects of Minoan life: political, economic, and religious power. Think that at the height of its power in 1700 BCE, the Palace of Knossos and its surrounding city were home to an estimated 20,000 to 100,000 people.
As we can see from the immense archaeological site and the reconstructions of the ancient palace, which was modified and rebuilt again and again over the centuries, due to the frequent earthquakes that hit the island, the complex included more than 1,300 rooms, including shops, offices, warehouses, and obviously the throne room.
The Palace of Knossos was a sprawling complex on several floors. It featured colonnades, colored corridors, a monumental staircase, and rooms decorated with frescoes. The heart of the palace was a huge central square, where the taurocatapsia, a ritual bull-leaping ceremony, took place, with the bull being a sacred animal. And it is here where history, archaeology, and myth meet. In fact, at Knossos, we find all the elements of the myth of the Minotaur, cult symbols of the bull, the complex structure of the building, and the throne room, the room of Minos. According to the legend, King Minos, the powerful ruler of Crete, had the architect Daedalus build a labyrinth to imprison the Minotaur, a half-human, half-bull creature. Athens, then subject to Crete, was forced to send 7 boys and 7 girls to Crete every 9 years as a tribute to King Minos and offered as a meal to the Minotaur. The story goes that Theseus, young prince of Athens and son of Aegeus, traveled to Crete to slay the Minotaur. While in Crete, Theseus fell in love with Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos. Before he entered the labyrinth, Ariadne gave him a ball of red thread to find his way out of the labyrinth once the beast was killed. In short, archaeology, history, and myth all tell us about a civilization that reached incredible heights of splendor at its peak, thanks to its dominion of the Aegean Sea. When you think about it, all these elements are reminiscent of Plato's description of Atlantis, but that's not all. We want to continue our journey by returning to our starting point, Santorini, and specifically Akrotiri. Akrotiri is a site that provides us with insights into how people lived and the technologies that distinguish them from other contemporary cultures. Akrotiri is also the place that best demonstrates what led to the inevitable decline of this civilization, the eruption of Thera. We are now in the archaeological site of Akrotiri, which once was a thriving Minoan city on the trade routes of Crete. We can imagine how these streets, the alleys, the squares of the city were filled with merchants selling spices, wine, oil, and saffron. We can assume that this trade made Akrotiri a wealthy city, as evidenced by the many frescoes that decorated the buildings and homes of its residents. In 1600 BCE, however, the city was destroyed by a volcanic eruption. Remarkably, the Minoan Eruption preserved the site, giving us a glimpse into what life was like at the time of the Minoan civilization. The ruins of Akrotiri reveal that it was a cutting-edge city, a true technological jewel. Many of the buildings in the city had several floors, up to 3, and they were built using stone, wood, clay, and chalk. This construction method was a true anti-seismic technology. The most incredible example of such a building is the West House. Other technologies found in Akrotiri include a vast underground water drainage system, wash basins in the upper floors of houses, siphons for removing gas and smells, running water, hot water, showers, and even the earliest known toilet flushes. Think that with the collapse of the Minoan civilization, some of these technologies were lost until the Middle Ages.
Some scholars hypothesize that the myth of Atlantis was precisely inspired by this affluent and rich city. In fact, Plato describes Atlantis as the home of a truly developed civilization with lost technologies, and that, as we know, sank into the waters overnight. All elements that perfectly describe Akrotiri.
If you think about it, the collapse of the Minoan civilization on Crete and the subsequent collapse of Mycenaean society in mainland Greece led to a period known as the Hellenic Dark Ages, when writing, art, and culture were lost for centuries, just to resurface in the culture of archaic and classical Greece, the Greece of Plato. The Greeks of these dark ages likely imagined the past as a golden age, and the Minoans as a powerful seafaring people who reached a level of technology that was unknown to them. And it is possible that Plato was inspired to create the myth of Atlantis by these ancient memories, perhaps passed down through oral tradition, although placing the fabled island in the Atlantic Ocean beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Clearly, the association between the explosion of Thera, Akrotiri, the Minoan civilization, and the origins of the myth of Atlantis is just a theory. There are in fact other theories, also based on what Plato tells us, which try to explain the origins of this myth. Some locate the lost city in the Atlantic Ocean. Others identify Atlantis with Stone Age Ireland. Others again hypothesize that Plato was inspired by Tartessos, a semi-mythical city beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the Iberian Peninsula. Going back to Akrotiri, beyond the myth of Atlantis, it is certain that a rich and affluent city existed on this island in the 17th century BCE. However, the city sank into oblivion overnight due to a volcanic eruption. Remarkably, it is interesting that no human bodies were ever found at the archaeological site of Akrotiri. This suggests that the city's population was likely warned of the eruption by the earthquakes that preceded it, and therefore we assume they were able to escape the island. The fate of the people who fled Thera is unfortunately unknown to us, but we do know that the eruption of the volcano, the Minoan Eruption, marked the beginning of the end of the entire Minoan civilization in the Aegean, on Santorini, and on Crete. So, in the last part of this video, we want to explore how the Minoan civilization met its end. Although the eruption of Thera probably caused devastation throughout the eastern Mediterranean Sea and buried Akrotiri under the ashes forever, it does not seem to be the direct cause of the collapse of the Minoan civilization. Scholars speculate that the Minoan eruption caused huge tsunamis that struck the coast of Crete, destroying coastal settlements and likely damaging the Minoan fleet, which was a major economic driver for the civilization. This total crisis may have made the civilization more vulnerable to the invasion and ultimately conquest in the 15th century BCE by the warlike Mycenaeans, leading to the end of Minoan hegemony over the Aegean forever. The Mycenaeans, who were immortalized in the epic stories of Homer, became the dominant military and economic power in the Aegean for the next 300 years. However, their civilization too would collapse during one of the most fascinating periods in history, the Bronze Age collapse. It is astonishing how a single natural event on a small island in the Mediterranean could have had such a profound impact, changing history forever. Some researchers believe that the eruption of Thera had far-reaching consequences that went beyond the Minoan civilization and may have even changed the fate of other populations. These include a proposed link between the eruption of Thera and the events described in the Book of Exodus. Researchers hypothesize that various effects of the eruption could have scientifically explained the 10 plagues of Egypt, the parting of the Red Sea, and the escape of the Israelites from Egypt to the Promised Land. So let's come back to present-day Santorini. After more than 3,000 years, it is a charming island with romantic sunsets known all over the world.
But knowing what happened here, the force of nature, its impact on civilization and culture, is what really makes this island and its sunset truly fascinating.
Finally, as we gaze at the majestic views of this caldera and imagine the ancient splendors, we leave you with the words of Plato, who tells us about the last moments of the legendary Atlantis, a formidable naval power that in ancient times ruled the seas. But afterwards, there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in one grievous day and night, all sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis, in like manner, disappeared into the depths of the sea.